Welcome to the Phyllis L. Kossoff Lecture on Education and Policy at Teachers College. We are especially honored to host the first major policy address in New York City by the New York State Commissioner of Education, MaryEllen Elia. We're just delighted. MaryEllen Elia, do I say? Her talk comes at a very important moment in education, with fundamental questions about the Common Core and its role as things evolve, standardized testing, teacher evaluation, just to name a few of the issues that are on her plate. And of course, a newly reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Every Student Succeeds Act. So there are many changes in educational policy, but we know that this commissioner is interested and cares about what all the stakeholders in education in this state think and feel and what they have in mind. And in just 6 months, she's already logged 20,000 miles on a listening tour that has brought her face-to-face with teachers, parents, and other members of the education community around the state. All of us at TC look forward to working closely with Commissioner Elia and her team, and especially welcome the opportunity to share our groundbreaking research and scholarship of our eminent faculty and our students. So we all know Teachers College is the nation's largest, oldest, and best graduate school of education. Yay! Committed to creating a smarter, healthier, and more equitable world, we unite work in education, psychology, and health to produce groundbreaking research and bring that work to bear on real problems to actually make a difference. And we are also the nation's premier address for issues of education policy. Many TC faculty and alumni are engaged at all levels of government and in New York State. As you know, the commissioner's predecessor was our alumnus, John King, and our voice is heard on many, many critical issues. Just a few examples. I always hesitate to give examples because I leave so many people out, but you'll excuse me for just giving a few. But in the nation's debate now on college access and affordability, Judy Clayton, one of our economists of education, has made a real difference in her work and has influenced the simplification of the financial aid form that students fill out. Sharon Lynn Kagan and colleagues who study early childhood education policy have helped shape that policy throughout the United States and in 72 countries in the world. Our Laurie M. Tisch Center for Food, Education, and Policy has played a major role in the reauthorization of the Federal Child Nutrition and Women, Infants, Children Reauthorization. And that actually is in that act, they particularly succeeded in doubling funding for the Farm to School program and mandating a study on the state of nutrition education in federal programs. But what's really interesting is that act originated with one of our most distinguished alumni, Shirley Chisholm. So it's really interesting to have this current generation work on the reauthorization. Our Community College Research Center is essential for issues of college access and completion. CCRC has just completed the first phase of a major initiative to tackle low transfer rates and provide colleges with the tools they need to improve. We are active in technology education, as the commissioner knows when she addressed her council. Ellen Meyer, one of our colleagues here, has been active in that in New York State and has also participated in a White House meeting on STEM and computer science education. She sits on the Regents Advisory Board in technology. A number of other colleagues, Aaron Pallas, Michael Rebell, for example, have been on various commissions on reform and on aspects of education policy. So many activities in education policy, too many to mention, but many of them are enabled by the support of a particular person who I want to recognize, and that's Phyllis Kossoff, who, would you stand up, Phyllis? A former New York City teacher, Phyllis Kossoff, wanted to find a way to have an immediate and meaningful impact at TC, and she understood how important it is to translate evidence-based research into policy that can transform education. And so that was the genesis of the Kossoff Lecture. This is a Kossoff Lecture. I admire Phyllis profoundly. She's generous with her time, and she's wise with her counsel. She's a valued member of the President's Advisory Council, and through the Phyllis and Burton Kossoff Endowed Scholarship Fund, she's already supported 11 students in our Human Development Program. And this particular lecture has enabled us to have the most exciting and important conversations about education policy. We've started a series of candidates' nights, 2008, 2012. We're looking forward to 2016. I've reached out to an education advisor of a potential candidate. Although how would one know at that stage? But hopefully we will have the education advisors of the party nominees in the fall as our Kossoff Lecture. We've had former U.S. Secretary of Education Arne Duncan, New York State Board of Regents Chancellor Merrill Tisch, and former State Education Commissioner David Steiner at these various events. And in 2014, New York City Schools Chancellor Carmen Farina used the Kossoff Lecture as her forum for reporting on her first 100 days in office. So the Kossoff Lecture is where it's at, and and we're so excited tonight to have Commissioner Elia, MaryEllen Elia, as our speaker. Before her appointment last May as commissioner, she served for 10 years as a superintendent of schools in Hillsborough County, Florida, the nation's 8th largest school district. And in her 45-year career as an educator, she spent many years as a teacher and administrator in that district. As superintendent, she successfully implemented higher learning standards, partnered with teachers to develop a comprehensive evaluation system, and earned national recognition for gains in student achievement. She was honored as 2015's Florida Superintendent of the Year, and she was one of 4 finalists for the 2015 National Superintendent of the Year award. She is, however, from Buffalo, so she's a New Yorker, and we welcome her home back to the state. She has shown an understanding of both flexibility and accountability in getting the job done. It's a big job, presiding over 700 school districts and 3.2 million students in New York State during some of the most challenging times in education. After her formal remarks to us tonight, there'll be an opportunity for questions, which we are soliciting live on Twitter at hashtag Kossoff2016. Aren't you glad you're a hashtag? I'm delighted that the Q&A will be moderated by Vikash Reddy, former president of the TC Student Senate and an outstanding doctoral student in our Leadership Policy and Politics program. Please join me in welcoming Commissioner MaryEllen Elia.
Thank you, Susan. Well, good evening, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, and I've had the opportunity to get reacquainted with a few people that I met earlier and also meet a number of new people that I feel like we need to tap the power of Teachers College to make sure that we can get input from so many different people. I'd like to take the opportunity first to introduce 2 of New York State regents that are with us tonight. Judy Chen and Lester Young. And as Susan mentioned, I'm going to breeze through my experience. I've been a teacher for 19 years, some in the Buffalo area at Sweet Home High School. I'm a social studies teacher and trained at the University of Buffalo State. And I have an undergraduate degree from Rosary Hill College, now Damon College. And I had a lot of experiences in Florida, multiple positions as a curriculum leader in a number of areas, namely in providing magnet schools and schools of choice within our public schools in Florida, and also the work that I've done with high schools and then as a superintendent for 10 years. So if you did the math, I started in 1970, and here I am in 2016. So I'm over 45 years of experience. I hope that's a good thing. But certainly you have the breadth of the changes that have occurred in education, don't you? Right? So I can remember when there was almost a revolution when we took down walls and we were going to have communities of students in our social studies department. I understand that within my leaving Hillsborough, or within my leaving Sweet Home, there are now walls everywhere in social studies. And I had the opportunity to work with some excellent professors, Barry Beyer and others of the University of Buffalo, and I've always felt like I was well kind of seasoned in the things that needed to be reflected on when you were working with students. I have one thing that some of you may not know, and I'm not even sure some of the regents that interviewed me for this job know, but I started the first alternative school program within a high school in New York State. It became the model, and basically what it was to take students that were just not hooking into high school. They had ability and they just didn't want to do it. And we moved to establish an academic program in the morning and a job opportunity in the afternoon. So I guess it's the closest thing that I've had experience with, particularly on putting in place a program that really met the needs of the students from their perspective, and not necessarily from the educator's perspective. So my first few months as commissioner, I've been here now 7 months, and people have joked and said, well, my goodness, 7 months, and I think it seems like many years. I'm excited to be back in New York. I have an interesting saying that my husband came up with when we decided we were going to make this move, and he said, you know, the weather in Florida is better, but the climate in New York is better. So I want to say that I'm excited to be back in New York, and I would say to you that I've had an opportunity to get out and hear a lot of different people who have many different views, and I have tried in the context of taking information and kind of collecting that together and seeing where I believe we really need to go to support student outcomes, to figure out some of the key areas that we really need to address in New York State. So I'm going to review those, talk a little bit about some of the action that the Regents has supported movement in, and where I think we're going, and then I'm going to, as Susan said, open it up to questions, because I think we always do much better when we hear the issues that are in front of us, right? And the people that are here in this particular setting, I think, are experts in field, if you will. So one of the first things I heard a lot about was Common Core. And so I was being questioned by a reporter, and he said, like, Common Core is terrible. And I asked him what he knew about Common Core. And he couldn't tell me what he was talking about when he told me it was so terrible. So I think part of what I tried to do is talk about the Common Core as standards. And in fact, since very early in our history in America, we have had schools that were developed in 1648 in Boston. And believe me, before the end of that century, there were changes in the standards that were being taught in their schools. So I think those of us that are part of education understand that there are shifts, and those shifts come about because we realize what we either haven't done well or that we need to change, and we need to look at that on a regular basis so that we actually are plugging into what is needed at the end of a 12, 13-year journey of our students. So Common Core, really, if you focus on the concept of learning standards, and I heard comments, many comments about Common Core, we began by putting out a survey called Aim High New York. And I thought it was very telling, the survey data that we received. Basically, 71% plus said we need to keep high standards or have high standards in New York. Then there was about 10,500 people who responded to that. This same survey had been used in several other states. New York, of course, had the most responses, which I was very proud of. And then, if you look at the next set, we had 250,000 pieces of data that came from those respondents about the standards that we have that had been implemented, because we had all the standards on online and asked them to review them. Now, I communicated with teachers and principals and superintendents directly and asked them to please give us information that they had and their feelings concerning the standards that they were most associated with. So I wouldn't expect a first grade teacher to go on and reflect on the mathematics standards in 11th grade. But I did believe that the experts who are working with our students in classrooms every day should be able to give us feedback on what they were seeing as they implemented the standards in our schools. As I said, 70% said we need high standards. We received 250,000 discrete pieces of opinion about the other standards, and they were mainly centered on the K3 and K4 environment for language arts and mathematics. So what I had heard across the state when I traveled and talked to different groups was specifically they didn't believe that the standards that had been adopted under Common Core actually were appropriate in some places for very young children. And given that, and given other information, and believe me, we have feedback on all the standards in both language arts and math, our next step is to move forward and gather experts, and I am sure that we will be tapping Teachers College to help us with experts in each field to give us feedback and be part of a review team to look at the standards, to take the feedback that we received, and to make ultimately recommendations to the policy leaders in the state of New York, our regions. And I think that process is an important process to go through, because much of what I heard was the standards just happened. Now, I can tell you that that wasn't the case, that the standards were online, people had an opportunity to discuss them, the regions had multiple conversations about them, but I can tell you that people perceived across the state they didn't have input. And I think it's important for people to have that input. And this process will be, the new word that's very, very critical is transparent. And I think what we need to do is make sure that people understand they will have an opportunity to give feedback, and ultimately we will move forward on an adoption of the revised standards. But keep in mind, 71% of the people that responded, and people across this state, including many teachers, people in the profession as educators, want high standards. I believe we need them. And so we'll be moving forward on the standards. The second piece that was really critical as I moved out across the state was what we didn't have resources and training for teachers to implement the standards in their classroom. I'm a strong supporter of professional development for teachers, and I think it needs to be ongoing, embedded in what's happening in a school, and people who have been trained to be able to give feedback that brings change in behaviors, but supports teachers getting better. So we are moving forward to do that. A strong curriculum is necessary, but to be perfectly honest, New York State Education Department is not the one to create the strong curriculum for everyone in the state to do. New York is not a state where everyone does the same. And I think it's really important that we put local control back in place and allow school districts to work with their educators and develop curriculum that will get their students to those high standards. So the approach that we're taking is to make available more resources online, to expand some of the work that was done in Engage New York, and to make sure that we have the opportunities for some of our subgroup populations to be identified, and strategies particularly that relate to the standards and the resources that are available online. But I have to tell you honestly, coming from Florida, Engage New York is the thing that is held up for everyone. And if you go to places outside of New York, you hear that all the time. But you know, it's within the 50 miles of the state border. It's not. And so we need to know the standards are put in place, we have resources available for districts and teachers, and move forward in that direction. But I think it's particularly important that we expand that and put multiple resources and connect to some of the resources available nationally to support teachers as they're developing their approach to deliver the standards. A third very, very big item were the assessments. You know, everybody has opinions on how the assessments match or don't match. I think assessments, quality assessments, are necessary. I think using the analysis that can be supportive of what we get, information that we get from assessments, is important. But I went to high school in New York State. I have a Regents diploma. When I talked to teachers across the state, they all said they didn't have an opportunity to be involved in that process. Now, there was an opportunity for teachers to be involved in the development of assessments. However, nobody knew about it. So if you don't know about something, you wonder, okay, how did this get done? And I think the reality is we have to expand the role that teachers play. We have to train them to be involved in the development of assessments that are going to support the agenda for students moving through the standards and being successful, and that we have higher outcomes. So I'm very, very supportive of making sure that we have assessments that provide information. I don't believe that one single assessment tells us a lot about what's happening in a school or in a classroom. So I'm a strong proponent of multiple assessments or multiple ways to determine how well a kid or a teacher or a group of students or a school or a district are doing. I lived through that in the world of Florida, which is very assessment-driven. And I can tell you that it often didn't take into account some of the things that really are critical when you're looking at how a class is made up and what students are moving forward. And I think it's really important for us to use assessments that, number one, possibly are embedded in the instruction. Clearly, that's, I think, a better approach. Another way to look at it is not something that is at the end of the year that doesn't have meaning for the teacher who had the students that were assessed. I think we've got to figure that out. We're moving the time so that teachers will get feedback on the current assessments. But basically, we need to improve the assessments and know that it shouldn't be the only thing that's used to work on or to get information on how well our students are doing. So when I say that, I want to underscore the importance of using the data that we get on the assessment. And again, this is one of those things that I think from a New York perspective, and certainly education across the country, we have had assessments for a very long time. People didn't become concerned about them until they became kind of the only thing in the room. And I think we've got to put assessments in an appropriate place in education within our schools across New York, but we need to rely on different types of assessment that can give us information as we're moving through the year, and not have a single assessment at the end of the year as the only thing that is used to determine how well we're doing. Some of the things that we have done related to assessment, we have changed the vendor, and we no longer have Pearson. We have hired a new company called Questar. They are very committed to working with our teachers as really experts in field who can give them feedback and review the questions and the passages, etc. And teachers for this spring's assessment are doing that. Secondly, we have shortened the assessments, not a lot, but we have shortened the assessments and taken out some of the multiple choice questions in the mathematics 3 through 8s, and also removed one of the passages that we have in the language arts. And I think it's important to know that as we're moving forward, we're moving the results to come back to schools before the teacher who had the students that were assessed leaves the school. Our goal is to get them back mid-June, no later than the end of June. So how many of you have been teachers in a classroom? Raise your hand. So you know how relevant it is 8 months later to get an assessment on a kid that you're trying to remember their face, right? And I think we have to all keep that in mind. We have to get that feedback back so that teachers can really take that information and use it. And when they use it, they can assess how that student did, pass that on as a piece of information, but also assess how they did. And I really think that assessments can be used in multiple ways. They have to be quality, and they have to give that kind of feedback. We are moving in New York State ultimately to computer-based assessments, and it will open up an enormous opportunity for us to do different types of assessments. And we really feel like that's going to help us immeasurably. And with particularly special populations, that we can start a student off at a certain level, and then as they're responding, that adaptive technology will help us then to put questions in front of them that are more at their level, if that's appropriate. Remember, I'm sure many of you are aware, it's been pretty much reported, I think, multiple times, we've requested waivers on the testing required from the federal government on students with disabilities and our ELL students, and been turned down. So one of the things that I think is exciting, and Susan mentioned the ESSA, the new law that was just passed and signed by the president, we're very excited about opportunities that 7 states will have to think differently and be creative about the assessments, and we hope that we are one of those blessed 7. But if we're not, we need to move forward anyway and do the things that we think are pretty critical for us to look at our assessments critically and determine what's the best approach to get feedback back to teachers. The last thing that has been kind of consuming the room across the state is the evaluation of teachers using assessments, and a single assessment used to evaluate a teacher at 50% of their evaluation. So one of the things that Susan mentioned when she introduced me, I had the opportunity in Hillsborough County to develop an evaluation tool for teachers with our teachers union. We were given a very large grant from the Gates Foundation, and we worked together to develop that. And it did have components. 40% was assessment, but it was multiple measures. 30% was the evaluation, or the observation rather, of principals, and 30% was the observation of peer teachers. And those teachers were trained. And we used Charlotte Danielson's rubric, and we had an enormous amount of training. And ultimately, we have used that to give feedback in a positive way. So I think I'm speaking to a crowd that would understand this, but the rhetoric around teaching and teachers has been extremely destructive in this country. And anybody that has been successful, many people across this country have gone through public schools, and when you ask them what helped them, what was really the key thing, it was their teachers. And yet we have a propensity in many settings to be negative about teachers. And those of you that raised your hand a few minutes ago know that that's not one of the easy jobs of the world. And it isn't getting easier. And we need to support teachers. We need to give them the tools that they need to be successful with our students. And that's the way that we're ultimately going to have success and outcomes for the kids of New York. So I'm a strong proponent of an accountability system, but I think the focus of it has to be what can we do to help people be reflective about their practice, work with their peers to get better, and then ultimately be focused on what's best for kids and help them to be on that page that they are going to make sure that their students are successful. And as I said, this isn't the easiest job to be a teacher, and we need to understand and support and help them. So we will be looking at the APPR system. As you're aware, we have unplugged and taken the negative consequences off of the assessments, and for both teachers and for principals. We will be running the system, so we will know where the issues are with our system. We're going to put a group of committee people together to review the evaluation process that we have in place on growth. Look at that growth model. Is it worth it? Isn't it? We need to review these things, but we need to do it. And I think it's important for us all to realize, and I can say it, having just come 7 months ago to being in the environment in New York. People in New York, many people across many areas who reflect on what's happening in our schools are at a high pitch. We need to unplug, and we need to set back, and we need to say, what are the things that need to be changed? But the way that New York got to the high pitch was moving at a warp speed. Maybe the things that were done would have ended up much better if they hadn't been done in the time sequence that they were. But I really believe that we have to hold people accountable. We need to know how our students are doing. We need to make sure, particularly our subgroup of students, that we are focused on what we can do to support them. But we can't do this so quickly that it's done fast without input, and we don't have the opportunity for educators and practitioners to really feel like they are part of that process. So I think that's a very important thing that as we move forward with the regents and talk about how are we going to be doing these things, that's an important discussion for us to have. Another hot topic, it's not one of my big four, but it certainly was something I faced after we saw the data come back on how many students took the test or didn't. 20% of the students in New York opted out of the 3 through 8 assessments. And you all know that that is the highest number across the nation. I'm not sure that that's where we want New York to be known for, but we have that distinction. And I think it's important for us to help now to communicate in a more positive and honest way. This is what the assessments are used for. We have taken away the high stakes approach to the assessments, and as we did that, we very purposefully said we're going to move forward at a pace where we can do the things that need to be done and do them well. And so I've had a number of questions from people that think, well, I'm making these changes and proposing regulation shifts for the regions so that I can deal with the opt-out movement. I am not dealing just with the opt-out movement. I think that would be very short-sighted. I think what we have to do is we have to look at all these things, listen to people, and appropriately make changes. Certainly the opt-out movement is something we have to be concerned about, since it is a federal law to take the 3 through 8 assessments. But I believe that as we move forward, that we will regain the trust of parents and teachers, that we're moving forward to do what we believe collectively is the approach that we need to take. And so I want to talk about a couple other things and then open it up to questions. I think teacher preparation and professional development is absolutely critical. And I'm speaking to all of you here at Teachers College, and you are, in fact, preparing teachers for our schools. The challenges that we have are often supported by having strong programs where teachers are actually embedded in a school for a period of time that gives them a chance to really know what's happening in a school and how they fit and what their role is as a teacher. And I certainly experienced in a very short period of time when I went in to do student teaching, it was like a flash. And all of a sudden you were there, and then all of a sudden it was over with. And did you really understand what was going to happen when you took that job and you became the teacher of record? And so I think that any programs that we have, we want to put in those types of activities for our teachers that are going to ultimately be in all of our classrooms across the state. They need to understand the challenges and the rewards and the great things that come with connecting to the students that we have. As you know, New York moved forward on certification exams for our teachers. We are looking at the certification exams. We are reconvening a committee that originally made recommendations to the regents about them. And I will say there's a number of regents that have brought important issues to us, and I think we need to listen and get feedback from the field on where we are with that. And is the process that we have in place helping us to get a higher quality and a better prepared teacher in our classrooms? I can tell you as a superintendent, I urged every principal that was making a hiring decision to look carefully at the experiences that potential teachers had, and to make sure that they had experience and call people and get references. I would suggest to you that some of the processes that we have in place in New York give a snapshot, if you will, of what that teacher has experienced in their student teaching. But I do think it's really an important part of preparing what we know will be the potential teacher corps across the state of New York and across the country. And we can't shirk from that. We can't think that we just need teachers so badly that we can let those standards fall. But on the other hand, we need to be realistic and review them in the context of having experts like people here at Teachers College work with us. So what's next? I'm going to keep on listening. I certainly am getting feedback on a regular basis from various sources. Some I like, some I don't like, but I'm getting it. The business of educating our kids is one that really requires constant, continuous feedback. We have in place, the regents have supported, the legislature has put in place a law that requires us every 5 years to look at our standards. I think that's a great thing. I think we need to be constantly thinking about what we're doing and what we can do better, and what isn't working, drop that off the page and put some things in that we think are much more focused on what we actually need to support our kids. I don't think any New Yorkers are going to shy away from giving me feedback. Okay, I haven't seen that yet, and I would be surprised if it occurred. And I know, for instance, that our regions are constantly getting feedback and getting ideas on things that they need to review. So in the coming months, the department will continue working with stakeholders to make sure that we put in place the right learning standards, the best assessments, different kinds of assessments if it's appropriate, and the fairest and most useful evaluation system to support teachers to continuous improvement and not to have anybody think that there's an evaluation system in place so I can get rid of you. We can't afford to get rid of people that have dedicated themselves to go through school and become teachers. We need to help them to get better, and we need to find the right mix for them and support that they need to be great. So I want to end my remarks about thanking you for your partnership in this. I had the opportunity to speak earlier to your president, and let me say, we will be tapping into the suggested areas of connection and partnership with Teachers College. This is a great institution, and we're very pleased to have that opportunity to work together. So I'd like to hear now what's on your mind, and as I said, I don't know New Yorkers that are weak-willed about telling me. So let's open it up to questions.
Thank you so much for your remarks this evening. And as Susan mentioned, my name is Vikash Reddy. I'm a doctoral student here at Teachers College in the Department of Education Policy and Social Analysis. I have been privileged to be part of the team that has been collecting questions over the past few days and also over the past few minutes. And so, without further ado,
Okay.
you've talked about the opt-out movement in the last few days and also this evening. And you've announced some measures to address concerns on the opt-outs, but I'd also note that tonight you talked about communication around the testing. And so I'm wondering to what extent you see your role and the next steps as fixing a problem, and to what extent you think about your role as communicating better about something that actually functions maybe reasonably well.
So I think that's a big piece of where we have to become much more proficient and much more proactive. We have to communicate better, but I'm sure you've read the research that indicates clearly that where parents get their information is from their teachers, their student's teacher, or the principal, or someone at their school that is associated with education. So I have a voice, the regents have a voice, we can say the things that we believe, but I think the communication, and this is really an approach that we've taken to get out to all of our superintendents across the state. New York State has over 670 school districts. They each have a superintendent and a school board and principals at their schools. And those are the people that we're trying to talk to give information to. A number of superintendents have reached out to us and said, would you give us kind of a bulleted point on the things that have shifted from last year so that they can use those to communicate with their communities, their business partners, and their parents. And I think that's a critical point for us. Understand that the most communication and the trust is closest to where their student stands. And so we need to be aware of that and get information out. And then, if we say we're doing something, we have to do it.
In terms of tweaks to the system, so you've mentioned untimed tests and decreasing content in tests. Are there any other measures you can see right now that you would take to address concerns?
Yes. When the regents a few years ago commissioned a report on every district and the amount of time they were spending on testing, one of the things that was a recommendation in that and an important comment was that students who were productively working were told that you can't do any more, right? And I'm a reading teacher, and I will tell you that we have a lot of students that I'm not sure I want to know if they can speed read, but I do want to know if they can comprehend. And so we have said that if there are students in any of the classrooms in New York, grades 3 through 8, who are working on the assessment productively, that is, they still are working and they want to continue, that they be allowed to do that. Lester Young indicated to me that we've had a history in New York where that was done, and I will tell you that that is done with standardized tests in other states. And so we're going to use that as an opportunity. One of the things that parents, and in fact there's been a couple articles about the stress that's created in students over assessment. We need to stop stressing kids if we can do that. Some kids just naturally are stressed, but we don't need to contribute to it. And I think we can do some things like that and allow students who are productively working to continue. Let me say this to you. When I think about the things that are pretty critical to make decisions about, I always try to think of what's the best for kids. This is going to cause some angst with adults. I will accept the fact that it does. I've had lots of opportunities to share this opportunity with superintendents and principals, and I was one of those. And so I know they've got to figure out a way to do this and not create havoc in their school. But if you're thinking of students, I believe that by allowing a student that's productively working to continue to work until they're done, if they want to, we should do that. And so it's based on a decision to support kids.
Turning now to charter schools. The past week's news coverage of you has included more than a few column inches about your attitudes towards charter schools. Can you speak about ways in which an Elia Department of Education will support charter schools and ways in which it will leave them to their own devices?
So you're going to have to repeat that second part, because I was in my mind thinking about where did I ever talk to anyone about charter schools other than 5 minutes in front of a group of parents saying how important parent involvement was and how they needed to support accountability for their children in whatever school they were in, a charter school, a traditional school, a private school, a public, whatever. So interesting, it got a lot of press. So the second part of the question was?
So the second part of the question was, can you speak about ways in which an Elia Department of Education will support charter schools and ways in which it will leave them to their own devices?
Well, charter schools across the country have been developed to be able to try different things that in a more traditional setting within a public school system that might be difficult. And you have a law in New York to allow charter schools. And I will tell you that I believe that charter schools have to be accountable like all public schools. They receive public money, and I think that's an important thing. I also believe that it's important for us as the Department of Education, just like I think if we can provide supports for non-public schools, we should do it. It's part of our mission at the State Department of Education, to support the students of New York. And let me remind you, charter school students are public school students. And so there are things that we can do to support. Their charter comes through the office in SED, one of the places that a school district or school can get chartered. We also have another office at SUNY, and they can go there. But if we have charter schools that are chartered through SED, we need to have the accountability for them like we have anyone else, and we need to support them if they need support.
So the next one thinks about a little bit about testing. And you've spoken about the need to balance testing against other school and classroom concerns, but you also this evening discussed the need to use multiple assessments to measure growth and progress. So one of the many points of contention in the current climate has been the crowding out of subjects like art and history and gym. And how do you intend to achieve the balance between assessment and these other important needs for children in schools and ensure that exams are administered in a way that these other activities receive their fair shake?
Well, let me say this. Assessment should not drive the curriculum that's in schools, right? Assessment should not drive what's available to our students. And clearly, the arts and music and other activities, social studies, I'm a social studies teacher. I went to speak to the social studies teachers of Long Island, and they were very vocal. And many of you may know that Long Island can be very vocal. But they were very vocal about something that I think is really a legitimate concern. So everybody has to put all these things in context, though. The assessments were made to be pretty important. Not at the beginning, but every time that there was a change in the teacher evaluation, it seems in New York, they became more important. And then I also want to say that we faced a very difficult recession at a time when school districts, particularly school boards and superintendents, are trying to balance their budget. We have the gap elimination taking money and subtracting that from budgets. And you had severe problems occurring in terms of the number of students whose families were affected by the recession, and therefore they had even greater need. So all these things converged, and we have issues, right? But we have to start getting things back in perspective. Tests should not drive what a curriculum should be in a district, and I can say that I think I'm a major component of reading and writing across curriculum areas, so that you don't have only a language arts teacher that thinks that they're the ones that test is mine alone. It's not. We have to say that we all are supporting teachers or supporting students to success, and we want them to have great outcomes. And the social studies teacher should be using the content and the skills that they have to get kids writing and thinking critically about social studies, and it should carry over. We've got to stop putting things in boxes. And I will say to you that one of the jobs that I had in my career, I was a teacher of teachers on how to teach reading in high school classrooms. And it was an eye-opener, because the social studies teacher, the science teacher, they all said, I don't teach reading. Only the language arts and English teachers teach reading. And we all know that isn't really the case. So we have to think of education in a holistic way, and all of us own that. And I will tell you, I think that Teachers College can be one of the leaders in getting that out. And I know you probably are, but I'm just saying it's an important concept for everybody to realize we're all in this. And education in the arts and all is a critical thing. So unfortunately, districts had to make tough decisions. And some of that is not going away, although I will say that the region's proposed budget will help in many ways. But we all know that the tax cap affected that in New York State for many of the districts. And so we've got some real issues to work through. But we can't forget that the students need to have more than just academic subjects, because there's so much more in education for all students.
So I'm told we have time for one more question.
Okay.
In your capacity as commissioner, how do you intend to help bridge the gap between K-12 and higher education? In what ways will you push both sectors to work together in smoothing the high school to college transition?
So I've had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Nancy Zimpher, the chancellor of SUNY, and also Dr. Milliken at CUNY and the independents, and I think we all have to be together on saying that that what you're doing with students and what CUNY and SUNY are doing in preparing students to be teachers and or to be in the workforce, we in K-12 also need to be working to make sure that that happens. One of the most exciting parts of this position, when I was called and talked to about perhaps applying, was the issue of the way that the regents and the state ed department in New York is structured. And the fact that in one entity, all of education is reflected is a big push, allows a big push for making those silos disappear. And I think that is an important task for SED to do. I've been working closely with John DeGotti, who's with me tonight, and Joan Ebert, who is also here on my staff. And it is an absolutely critical thing for us to be able to move forward and say, when a student enters pre-K, and we all know we like pre-K, But when they enter pre-K and we get them ready and they leave us after a high school diploma, we can't have them going into remediation for the full year that they're at school before they can actually matriculate. Please. Dr. Zimfer and she has actually proposed some legislation. It has been proposed 2 or 3 years in the past and has not been successful, but we're trying to work out a way that within the high school environment, we can support students being successful and be ready for whatever they want to do after our high schools, whether it's post-secondary, whether it's go directly into a job because we've given them the opportunity to get a vocational certification in some area, or whether they go on to college and they've already taken enough high school that they enter as a sophomore or a junior. Those are all the ultimate. We've got to make lots of opportunities for kids across the board. Kids don't all walk to the same drummer. We've got to make sure they have lots of options, and it's a critical thing to make sure that pre-K, and I would suggest pre-K through 20 and beyond, really become part of the reality in New York.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have here just a small token of our appreciation for your time this evening, for your candor, and for being here.
So you must know that when I moved from Florida, I was cold every day. So thank you very much.
And before I let everybody go, I'd just like to say a few thank yous. First of all, again, to Commissioner Elia for being here. I'd like to thank Phyllis Kossoff for supporting so many wonderful events that make the TC experience really great for students. And I'd like to thank all of you for being here, the folks who joined us on the live stream, and everybody who helped contribute to the question section of this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.